Hi, I'm Alyssa from Mountain Mill, and today we're going to show you guys how we saddle our mules. So one of our most asked questions is, how do we saddle our mules? What's the difference between a mule and a horse? And do we use mule-specific tack? So we're going to answer all those questions in today's video. But first, we start by brushing out all the dust and dirt out of his coat. We're going to do that real fast. So this is Clyde. He is my 7-year-old John Mule. He's out of a quarter horse mare and a spotted mammoth jack donkey. He's about 15 two hands or so, and you can see he is very wooled up. He's got his winter coat coming in strong. And one thing we wanted to talk about is even if you find the perfect saddle, you have to know that your equine is going to change throughout the year. This goes for horses as well as mules, but their winter coat getting thicker, if they gain weight or lose weight, gain muscle or lose muscle, that is going to make your gear fit different throughout the year. So always check your tack. Don't ever just set it once and think it's good forever, because these guys shift and change just like us. And it's good to always check your tack and just make sure it's still fitting like it should. So the first thing we want to touch on is there are some differences between mules and horses. So right off the bat, the biggest difference is mules are going to have a much flatter back than most horses are. And Clyde has a little more sway to his back for a mule, but overall they're going to have a really flat back. They might have what's called mutton withers, which these are their withers here, which means they just really don't have any. And a lot of those features help hold your saddle on. So mules are not built super great for holding the saddle in place. And we'll look at Riata here, which is Jason's mule, and she has an even flatter back than Clyde, which is a little more horse built when it comes to mules. So you can see here on Riata, the difference in height between her back and her withers is not much. She is pretty flat all the way across here. With a horse, you're going to see more pronounced withers and then more sway to their back. And that's going to help hold your saddle in place. So later on, as we tack up, we'll show you how you can combat that and keep your saddle from sliding forward on these mules. Good girl. So the first thing we want to talk about is a good quality saddle pad. We like these felt saddle pads. 5-Star makes a really good product. And we like them around 3/4 to 1 inch in thickness. If you get too thick of a pad on, a lot of people think if the saddle doesn't fit right, get a thicker pad, and actually it's kind of the opposite of that. So we'll go into more detail. We're planning on doing an in-depth mule saddling video with a friend of ours, and so we're going to go in more depth then, but for now this is kind of just a basic 101. This is how we saddle our mules, and this is the gear we use. So we like to use a good felt pad. These are the ones I use on Clyde. I have a pad liner and then a felt pad, and that's just because this was a little too thin. I like to run just a little bit thicker, and so this turned out to be the perfect thickness, these two pads together, to where his setup fits him really nicely. So, and it's good too, because this pad liner, I can take that off, I can wash it, and it keeps from building up any kind of bacterial or fungus that might cause issues with him. So first thing, put our pad up there. Imagine where your saddle's going to go. Try to place your pad under where your saddle's going to go. Make sure everything's square and good. Laying flat on him. Good boy. So next we have our saddle. We ride in Western saddles. You can definitely ride mules in an English saddle and ride them in English disciplines. We've had people ask us that before, thinking that mules wouldn't go English, but they definitely do. We know some people have really nice dressage mules. So but we ride in a Wade style saddle. This is actually a McCall saddle. It's built for horses. A lot of people think you have mule saddles and horse saddles. And really that's kind of a myth. Whatever saddle tree fits your equine, it doesn't matter if it was originally built for mules or for horses. We just got to find one that fits our individual equine. And mules can tend to be built all different ways. Like Clyde is more built like a horse. Riata's definitely got the donkey build going to her, so she needs a much flatter saddle as far as the bars go in our saddle than Clyde does. So again, we're going to get into the depth of the parts of the saddle fitting on a later video. This is just going to touch how we saddle our mules. So I have my McCall saddle. It was built for horses. It fits Clyde really nice for now, and that's what I'm using. So I like to swing it up here and kind of make it feel like a big hug. I don't want to slam it down on his back. So I always like to take my saddle pad and pull it up in the front. That just relieves the pressure off their withers in here. And a lot of times when you set your saddle down, that saddle pad will get pinched down on there. So I just want to make everything straight, get all my little ties out of there. Now we can come around here. So first step is I'm going to let down my front and back cinch. Some people run like a double rig mohair cinch like I have on the front, on both the front and the back on their mules. The way we do it is just exactly like you would a horse. We just use a leather back cinch. It's a mohair front cinch. And I always like to check, like I said, your horses and mules can change throughout the year. And we also put saddles on different equines, so it's always good to check. I want these rings to be in the middle or slightly on this side of the middle of their belly. That way when I pull it up tight on the other side, these rings will be right in the middle. And that's important, one, to square up your back cinch, and two, to also give you a clip that's right in the middle for your breast collar, which we'll go over later. So these are all laying nice and flat. I'll go back over to this side. So I'm going to undo my latigo. I always want to reach for the cinch with my head up towards my mule's head. That way, if you're around a green animal or an animal you don't know, they don't kick you in the head. So I always like to just get my cinch to where it's barely snug. Enough that it's going to hold that saddle on if you were to move around, but I never want to just tighten it up as tight as I can. Alright, so after I have this front cinch snugged up, then the next thing I'm going to do is the back cinch. These are just my hobbles on here. But again, I'm going to reach forward so my head's up there. And this back cinch, I don't put it on there too tight, but I like it to be snug. One thing is it serves a purpose. It's going to keep your saddle down in the back, help keep your saddle on. Another thing is if this thing is real loose under their belly and they go to kick it a fly, they could get a foot hung up in there. So it's important to at least have this up against their belly, but I like it a little tighter so that way it's doing its job by keeping my saddle in place. Next is going to be our breast collar. And on mules, it's important that you use a certain kind of breast collar, in our opinion. Mule shoulders move a lot more different than a horse's, and they tend to really come forward a lot more. They're built a little more straight up and down. And so when you use a breast collar that comes off at this angle, it'll tend to rub your mule's raw right in here. This is more of a pulling style breast collar. It's connected up here. It allows your mule shoulders to have a freedom of their full range of motion, and it doesn't end up rubbing your mule raw. So we like these pulling style breast collars. All right, now I'm going to take my strap down here, clip it to my cinch. And I don't want this super tight. Because you can actually cut off their wind supply if you were to tighten this up too much. I need it just tight enough that if my saddle starts slipping back, it's going to hold it for me. But I don't want it so tight that it's going to get in his way. Alright, so we talked a little bit about how your saddle tends to go forward on a mule just because they don't really have any withers. We've even seen it where a mule starts bucking or something happens, or going down a steep hill, and they don't have anything holding that saddle back, and that saddle can actually slide clear up over their head. So it is important on a mule to run something that helps hold your saddle back from sliding up over their head, or at least running up on their neck. And there's two different things you can use. So I'm going to show you one of them, which is a breechin. Some people call it a breeching. So there's a couple parts to your breechin. Now, one thing to note is that if you have a saddle that was built for horses in mind, it's probably not going to have all the little hooks and clips and rings in the spots where you need it to run a breechin or a crupper, which we'll talk about later. And it's as simple as going into your saddle shop and having them put those on. Most saddle shops can put those on for you. So since this was a horse saddle, We did have a crupper ring put on in the back, but unfortunately my britchin needs 2 different rings and I don't have those rings. They should be back here on either side of my saddle. So instead I'm running it to my back cinch D-ring, which works just fine. But usually a mule saddle will have rings on either side of the skirt back here. So one part of your britchin is your spider. We want this to be up on the point of their hip. So one part are these quarter straps. I like to run them over the top of my back cinch up to my front cinch D-ring. And the job of this thing is just to hold your saddle back if you're going down steep hills mainly. So you want to make sure that you don't have your butt pad back here too tight. So usually a hand plus about 1/2 inch or 1 inch or so is a good starting place. And this might be a little bit high. I like to run it somewhere from here to about here, just right where you can kind of see that indent in their butt muscle, right in there. And you can play around with that on your animal. You might end up having to run it a little tighter or a little looser. And sometimes throughout the ride, you need to adjust it as well. But we're going to start off with it there. So now, other than I'll check my cinch a couple more times before we actually get on and go. Usually we do a little bit of groundwork with our mules, just make sure that mentally they're ready to go. And we'll tighten that cinch up a couple more times throughout us working with them, and then we're ready to go for a ride. So we'll show you on Riata though real quick what a crupper is like, and that's the other option you can use for holding your saddle back on a mule.
All right, well, Alyssa is running that britchin. I'm running what they call a crupper. It serves the same purpose as a britchin, just to keep the saddle from running forward, since these guys don't have much for withers, especially Riata. Riata's tail is getting so long and pretty. But this just goes up under the base of their tail. She's pretty good. She kind of lifts her tail up to let me install it there. Then I have a little crupper plate on the back of this because it is specifically a mule saddle like Alyssa was talking about. And it just clips on this D-ring up there and it stays right under the base of her tail there. So a lot of folks talk about how croupers will pull real hard and torque on their tailbone, which is part of their spine. And it's true, that is part of their spine. But the way these sit, they don't have any, there's really no leverage on their tailbone. It's not pulling up like this. It's more sitting in a way that it's like right under the base of their tail. So it's just kind of pulling more against their butt muscles instead of on that actual tailbone. Riata hasn't had any problem with this. I've been riding her in just a crupper, no britchin for like 3 years now, and she does great with it. So when I'm putting this on, I'm always kind of careful to make sure and get the hair kind of pulled out so it's not all bunched up under there and uncomfortable for them. So one thing to think about is make sure that your animal is used to a crupper before you just throw one of these things on and head off into the hills. Because if they're not used to it, that's a pretty good way to get yourself into a little bit of a rodeo. So this is a Hud Roberts saddle. It's actually made specifically for a mule. It has mule bars in the saddle. The bars are the part that sit right on their back. And instead of having a little sway to them, these are much flatter than Alyssa's McCall saddle. So Hud Roberts, assembled in Texas. It's a pretty affordable saddle. It's nothing fancy, but it works pretty good on Riata anyway.
So that's what we use. This is how we saddle our mules. There's a bunch of different ways to saddle an equine. Everyone has a different way of doing it. But this is what works for us, so we just thought we'd share with all you guys. So thank you so much for watching. And don't forget to subscribe if you want to learn more about saddling, because we will be having a more in-depth video later this year on everything when it comes to saddle fitting a mule.
1, 2, 1.